Some words describe what we do, others describe the subtle ways in which experience develops and takes shape. Samskara belongs to the latter. Every experience leaves behind a trace, not just as a memory, not only as a story we remember, but as a subtle shaping within the field through which we experience the world. A thought is repeated, an action is practiced, a habit is returned to again and again. Each of these moments leaves an imprint. Over time, these impressions influence how experience is organized, how attention moves, and how the world is encountered. But what is it that is actually being shaped? Awareness itself isn't. The seer doesn't change, move, or acquire impressions. Consciousness remains the constant presence through which all experience is known. What changes is the field of experience, the evolving expression of prakriti or nature through which experience becomes known. Yoga describes this field as operating through the antakarana, the inner instrument through which experience is organized, what we commonly refer to as mind. The antakarana isn't a single function, but a complex inner instrument through which perception, sensation, thought, memory, discernment, identity, and relationship arise. Chitta refers to the field within which these movements arise and through which experience becomes organized. It's through this inner instrument that attention is directed, energy moves, and the body participates in experience. Rather than existing as separate systems, the mind, body, breath, attention, and energy function as interconnected dimensions of one living process. Each influences the other, each reveals something about the whole. The body expresses what the instrument is organizing. The mind interprets what the body reveals. Attention gathers or scatters experience. Energy animates every movement. A simple analogy can help us to understand this relationship. Imagine your body as a house. Within that house is a window, the way you encounter and see the world. The window represents the instrument through which experience is perceived. It's the particular body, mind, and energetic system through which awareness meets this lifetime. The window doesn't create the world outside, it doesn't create the light that enters, but the condition of the window influences how clearly the world is perceived and how much light passes through. If the glass becomes covered with dust or smoke, the landscape outside may appear distorted. The problem isn't the landscape. The problem isn't the light. The condition of the window affects the clarity of what is seen. Yoga isn't the process of creating a new window. It's the process of recognizing what obscures clear seeing, and that seeing has become obscured. Through practice, through ethical living, attention, breath, meditation, and self inquiry, we can begin to understand the impressions that have accumulated within the instruments of perception. We begin to meet the conditioning, the patterns, and the movements that have shaped how experience is interpreted. This is why yoga is often a process of uncovering rather than acquiring. Presence was never absence. The knower was never obscured. What became obscured was our recognition of the knower through the conditioned instrument. How do we begin to recognize our own window? Through sadhana, the field is refined. Through awareness, what has been unconscious becomes invisible. Through practice, the relationship with experience begins to transform. And through this transformation, perception becomes clearer, not because we've created something new, but because what was always present can finally be recognized. Through repeated practice, this instrument gradually becomes refined or conditioned. Yoga gives this ongoing process of shaping a name, samskara. The Sanskrit word samskara is often translated as impression, conditioning, or latent tendency. While these translations point toward aspects of its meaning, the Sanskrit itself reveals something deeper. Samskara derives from sam plus kur, where sam means together, completely, wholly, or thoroughly, and the root kur means to make, to form, to create, or to bring into being. Together, the word carries the sense to form completely, to shape thoroughly, to refine through repeated formation. At its foundation, Samskara describes a process of shaping. Something raw becomes refined, something unformed acquires structure, something repeated becomes established. Within the field of experience, repeated movements gradually leave subtle impressions. Over time, these impressions become established patterns, grooves within the instrument of perception that influence how future experience is encountered. These impressions and traces, which through repetition become established patterns, are what yoga calls samskaras. In the Yoga Sutras, experience unfolds within the relationship between the seer and the seen. Patanjali describes the seen as composed of the gunas, illumination, activity, and inertia, and consisting of the elements earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and the sense organs. Its purpose is Bhoga Aparvaga Artham, to provide both experience and liberation for Purusha. The world of experience is therefore not separate from the path of yoga. It's the very field through which recognition becomes possible. Prakriti, the creative matrix, unfolds. The senses engage, the mind organizes, attention moves, experience arises. And through this process, the relationship between the seer and the seen becomes known. Yet, because the instrument of perception is constantly interacting with experience, it's also constantly being shaped by that interaction. This shaping is the domain of samskara. To understand samskara, we first have to understand the field in which these impressions arise. Patanjali begins the Yoga Sutras by defining yoga itself. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the movements of the mind. This Yoga Sutra is often translated as the control or restraint of the fluctuations of the mind. But the Sanskrit reveals something more precise. The movements being described aren't movements of awareness itself. Chitta is often translated as mind, but it points to something more expansive. It's the field of mental activity, the inner ground in which perception, thought, memory, imagination, emotion, and identity arise, and through which experience becomes organized. It's the field within which the movements of experience occur. These movements are called vritti. Patanjali isn't describing movements of awareness itself. Awareness doesn't move or change. The movements belong to nature through chitta, the instrument through which awareness encounters experience. Within chitta arise different movements: pramana, vipayaya, vikalpa, nidra, smritaya. They include right perception, misperception, conceptual construction, sleep, and memory. Each movement within chitta is an interaction between the instrument of perception and the experience being encountered. And because experience leaves traces, these movements participate in shaping the field itself. A movement of chitta leaves an impression repeated becomes a pattern influences future movements. This is the relationship between vritti and samskara. The vritti is the movement arising within chitta. The samskara is the trace left by that movement. The movement shapes the field, and the shaping of the field influences future movements. A thought repeated, entertained. A perception repeated, reinforced. An action repeatedly practiced. Each movement leaves an imprint within chitta. Over time, these impressions influence how attention moves, how perception is organized, and how future experiences are encountered. Samskara is therefore not simply something stored somewhere in the mind. It's the ongoing formation of the field through repeated movements of experience. The field of chitta is continuously shaped by what passes through it, and through sadhana, that same field can gradually be refined. Through attention, the relationship between the inner instrument and the outer instrument is formed. The mind, as the inner instrument of perception, organizes experience through thought, memory, interpretation, and meaning. The body, as the outer instrument of perception, receives and expresses experience through sensation, movement, breath, and physiological response. These aren't separate systems. The mind influences the body reveals information to the mind, breath connects the two, and attention determines where energy is directed within this relationship. Where attention goes, energy follows. What receives repeated attention becomes strengthened within the field of experience. And this is why attention is so central to yoga. Patanjali describes different conditions of chitta, revealing that the mind is not a fixed object, but a field whose quality influences how experience is received and interpreted. The challenge isn't that the senses exist. The senses are functioning according to their nature. They provide information from the manifest world. The challenge is when attention becomes continuously pulled outward without awareness, allowing external impressions, conditioned responses, and habitual patterns to organize experience. When attention is scattered, experience is more easily interpreted through established patterns. When attention becomes steady and gathered, buddhi has greater capacity to discern what is actually present. A gathered attention creates the conditions for clearer seeing. A scattered attention reinforces identification. Where attention repeatedly gathers, patterns become reinforced. What receives attention becomes familiar. What becomes familiar begins to influence the future organization of experience. Through repetition, impressions are formed. A movement of attention repeated over time leaves a trace within chitta. That trace becomes an established pattern within the field of experience. The pattern influences how future experiences are perceived, interpreted, and acted upon. The body may begin to express these established patterns through sensation, posture, breath, tension, movement, and response. The mind may continue to interpret these patterns through thought, memory, and identity. Together, these movements participate in the ongoing formation of samskara. When these impressions become deeply established, they may express themselves as latent tendencies or vasanas that continue to draw experience in familiar directions. The practice of yoga, therefore, is not the rejection of experience, but the refinement of the relationship through which experience is known. By gathering attention, regulating energy, and refining the instruments, the field becomes clearer. And as the field becomes clearer, buddhi becomes more capable of discerning what is actually present. If samskara shapes experience, what exactly is it? Is it simply memory? The relationship between attention, chitta, and samskara reveals something important. Samskara isn't simply something we remember. One of the easiest ways to misunderstand samskara is to reduce it to memory. Memory is the ability to recall something from the past. Samskaras is the subtle formation that continues to influence the present. Within chitta, experiences leave impressions. These impressions aren't only stored as memories or stories we consciously recall. They become part of the organization of the field through which future experience is encountered. A memory is something we can bring forward into our awareness. A samskara is something that may already be shaping how we perceive, interpret, respond, and relate before we consciously organize it. We don't consciously remember learning language each time we speak. We don't remember every moment of practicing a skill each time we perform it. Still, those repeated experiences have shaped the instrument through which action now occurs. The same is true for our inner patterns: patience, fear, compassion, avoidance, generosity, reactivity. Each can become established through repetition, not only within thought, but within the relationship between the mind, body, breath, attention, and energy. A repeated movement of attention can become a tendency. A repeated emotional response can become a familiar pathway. A repeated way of relating can become a pattern through which experience is organized. Over time, these impressions influence the instrument through which awareness encounters life. The question isn't whether we are shaped. We are always being shaped. The question is, what is shaping the field through which experience is known? If samskaras are the impressions formed within the field of experience, then an important question arises. What determines whether these impressions reinforce clarity or reinforce obscuration? A movement of experience doesn't become binding simply because it leaves a trace. The question is, through what state of attention was that experience encountered? Attention is the bridge through which experience becomes organized. The state of the mind, the state of the body, and the movement of energy all influence how attention engages with experience. Through attention, an experience is emphasized, interpreted, and integrated into the field of perception. When attention is gathered and steady, buddhi has greater capacity to discern clearly. Buddhi doesn't create clarity. Rather, when the movements of chitta become less disturbed, buddhi's capacity for discernment becomes less obstructed. When attention is scattered, reactive, or repeatedly pulled by conditioned patterns, perception becomes more easily shaped by those same patterns. This is why the training of attention is central to sadhana, because the quality of attention influences the quality of perception, and the quality of perception influences the impressions that are formed. Patanjali addresses the conditions that obscure clear seeing through the kleshas. The kleshas are avidya, or obscured seeing of reality; asmita, I amness, or misidentification; Raga, attachment, dvesha, aversion, and abhinavesha, clinging or fear of dissolution. These aren't samskaras themselves, and these aren't moral failures or personal defects. They are conditions through which attention and perception become organized in ways that obscure the distinction between the seer and the seen. At the root is avidya, not seeing clearly, or what many call ignorance. When attention repeatedly moves through obscured states of mind and body, experience is interpreted through conditioned patterns rather than through clear discernment. A thought appears. Attention moves toward it. The body responds. Meaning is assigned. A reaction follows. A movement is repeated. An impression is formed. Over time, these impressions become established patterns. Those patterns influence attention. Attention influences the organization of experience. Experience reinforces the original pattern. A cycle begins. This is why yoga doesn't simply ask us to change our thoughts. It asks us to understand the deeper structures through which attention, perception, sensation, thought, and reaction repeatedly arise. The challenge isn't that impressions exist. The challenge is that impressions formed through obscured attention can continue to reproduce the same obscuration. However, the same principle works in the opposite direction. When attention is repeatedly gathered, when the body is steadied, when energy is regulated, and when experience is met with clarity, different impressions are formed. The field begins to reorganize itself. Through sadhana, attention becomes refined. Through refined attention, perception becomes clearer. Through clearer perception, buddhi becomes more capable of recognizing what is actually present. What receives attention becomes the field that is cultivated. If samskara is the process through which repeated movements shape the field of experience, then the same process that creates conditioning can also become the pathway of refinement. Yoga doesn't suggest that all samskaras are obstacles. The existence of impressions itself is not the problem. Every experience leaves traces within the field of experience, and every practice creates its own refinement. The question isn't whether impressions are formed. The question is what kind of movement is shaping the field. Patanjali describes this directly. The samskaras born from that state obstruct other samskaras. Patanjali, therefore, doesn't present samskaras as something to be eliminated, but something to be understood, refined, and transformed. Here, Patanjali reveals something significant. A samskara can arise from clarity, a pattern can be cultivated that interrupts previous patterns. Practice itself creates an impression within the field of experience, but the quality of those impressions isn't determined by the action alone. It is shaped by the intention, attention, and relationship through which the action is performed. A repeated movement arising from clarity, discernment, and alignment with Dharma leaves a different trace than a movement arising from attachment, avoidance, or misidentification. Samskara isn't inherently pure, positive, or liberating. Samskaras can reflect the movement that is repeated, and that movement is shaped by the condition of attention, intention, and the relationship through which the action is performed. The action alone doesn't determine the quality of the impression. The whole field participates. A person can meditate from different orientations. Meditation practice from grasping, like I need to become special, I need powers, I need to escape myself, will leave a different impression than meditation practiced from humility, inquiry, and recognition. Ethical action performed for external validation leaves a different impression than ethical action arising from alignment with Dharma. Discipline practiced through self rejection creates a different relationship than discipline practice through care and understanding. So the deeper teaching isn't meditation creates good samskaras. It's actually every intentional movement creates a samskara, and the quality of that samskara is influenced by the condition from which the movement arises. Meditation creates a samskara. Ethical action creates a samskara. Compassion creates a samskara. Steady attention creates a samskara. But the impression reflects the movement behind the action, the quality of attention, the intention guiding it, and relationship through which it is expressed. Each intentional return leaves a trace. Each moment of presence participates in refining the field. These impressions don't transform or improve consciousness itself. Awareness was never unclear. Rather, they refine the instrument through which awareness is recognized. They gradually reduce the movements that obscure clear seeing. And eventually, even when these refined impressions serve their purpose, not by creating a new identity, but by allowing the movements of chitta to become increasingly transparent, the instruments become clearer. The field becomes quieter. The seer is recognized as it has always been. Yoga isn't simply about what we do, it's about the relationship from which we do it. This is where samskara and sadhana meet. If samskara describes how repeated movements shape the field of experience, then sadhana describes the conscious cultivation of the movements that refine the field. The word sadhana comes from the root sad, meaning to accomplish, complete, or bring to fulfillment. Sadhana isn't simply something we practice, it's the intentional cultivation of the conditions through which the instruments of perception become refined. Through sadhana, attention is gathered, energy is directed with greater awareness, the body becomes more stable, the breath becomes a bridge between the physical and the subtle dimensions of experience. The mind becomes more familiar with its own movements. Every repetition matters, every return to awareness, every ethical choice, every moment of steady attention. Each participates in the reshaping the field. Sadhana is therefore not the attempt to create awareness. Sadhana refines the conditions through which awareness is recognized. The goal isn't to create a different self. The movement of sadhana is to refine the instruments so that what has always been present can be more clearly recognized. If sadhana is the conscious refinement of the instruments through which repeated attention and practice, samadhi reveals what becomes possible when that refinement reaches a profound level of stillness. This reveals the relationship between samskara and samadhi is known. Samadhi is the condition in which the movements within the field of experience have become sufficiently quiet and refined that identification with them no longer obscures recognition of the seer. Samskaras describe the impressions and patterns that shape the field. Sadhana refines the organization of that field. Samadhi reveals what remains when those movements no longer dominate perception. It's not that experience disappears. Instead, the relationship with experience changes. Thoughts may arise, sensations may arise. The body continues to function. The mind continues its natural movements. But identification no longer obscures the recognition of the awareness through which all experience is known. The light was never absent. The window was never the source of the light. The instrument simply becomes clear enough to reflect it without distortion. Maybe this is why yoga places such importance on the smallest movements of life. Every thought, every action, every relationship, every direction of attention. Each participates in the shaping of the field of experience. The Sanskrit word samskara reminds us that experience isn't simply something that happens to us. Every moment of perception, every movement of attention, every relationship we enter participates in forming the way experience is organized and encountered. And because the field can be shaped, it can also be refined. What has become habitual can become conscious. What has become unconscious can become observed. What has become scattered can gradually become gathered. The question isn't whether we are being shaped. We are always being shaped. The question is, what are we allowing to shape the field through which life is known? So maybe this is why Patanjali begins not by asking us to change who we are, but by asking us to understand the movements through which experience is formed. The seer doesn't need to be created. The seer doesn't need to be improved, healed, or awakened. The seer is already present. The work is the refinement of the instruments to see clearly, to attend consciously, to recognize the patterns that shape experience, and gradually, through sadhana, allow the field of experience to become transparent enough for awareness to stand in its own nature. The light doesn't change, the lens changes. The seer doesn't become more present, the instrument becomes more capable of recognizing what has always been present. This is why the language of becoming more present requires deeper understanding. Presence itself isn't something we create through effort. What changes is our capacity to recognize it. The purpose of life isn't toward acquiring something that was missing. It's the movement of uncovering what has been obscured. Sadhana provides the path for that uncovering. It gives structure to the process of refinement. It shows us how attention can be gathered, how the body can become steadier, how the breath can become a bridge, how the mind can become clearer, and how discernment can become more available. Clarity isn't simply an idea. Clarity has a path, clarity has a practice, clarity has a sequence. The question isn't simply, how do I become present? The deeper question is, what prevents me from recognizing the presence that is already here? And through sadhana, we can begin to participate consciously in that movement of clearing. I wonder if what I've been pointing to in this reflection is that the deeper teaching of samskara isn't simply about how experiences shape us and are shaped by us. It's about relationship. Every moment of life is a relationship between awareness and experience, between the seer and the seen, between the instrument and what moves through it. The mind isn't separate from the body. The body isn't separate from energy. Energy isn't separate from attention. Attention isn't separate from how experience is encountered. Each influences the other. And through these relationships, the field of experience is continually being shaped. This is also why our relationship with words matters. A word isn't simply a sound. A thought isn't simply a thought. An experience isn't simply an event. Each carries meaning through the relationship we form with it. The question isn't only, what am I experiencing? The hidden question is, how am I relating to what I am experiencing? Because the quality of our relationship determines whether an experience continues to reinforce established patterns or becomes an opportunity for recognition and transformation. This is the movement of yoga. This is the movement of life. Not escaping experience, not rejecting the instruments through which life is known, but refining our relationship with them, refining attention, refining perception, refining the instruments, until the movements that once obscured clear seeing become transparent enough to reveal what has always been present. Slow down, gather yourself, and return to what is true.